So, an often requested topic I get on this channel is to cover the differences between champions in League of Legends and their counterparts in Wild Rift. While I myself don't actually play Wild Rift, as one MOBA is enough for the sake of my mental health, I'd be lying if I said it didn't pique my interest to at least give it a look. In light of the vast differences between two thumbs and a mouse and keyboard, not to mention the comparatively far less amount of screen real estate, champions are tweaked around a bit in Wild Rift to make them feel more intuitive or user-friendly. And I believe the Wild Rift and League team consist of entirely different departments, so there might just be a difference of opinion in how a champion should be designed, or given Wild Rift came out in 2020, they might have seen it as an opportunity to modernize old champions on account of the game being standalone from its predecessor. As a result, dozens of champions are different in Wild Rift, ranging from a small change in one ability to having entirely reworked gameplay that you'd be hard-pressed to call them the same thing. For today, I want to talk about 10 champions in League that I personally think would benefit greatly from having their Wild Rift versions. A moment before we talk about Wild Rift, Opera GX is back to sponsor my channel once again. Always a pleasure to have them on board. I hope you guys haven't forgotten them since I get them pretty often, but just in case you need a refresher, Opera GX is a gaming browser designed to give you more freedom in optimizing and customizing your browser, letting you control how much of your PC the browser is allowed to use, and also giving you way more features to tailor your experience to whatever you want it to be. They recently partnered up with Riot Games to make the official Riot Corner, which comes with a co-streaming hub and access to limited time drops and bundles on lolesports.com that only Opera GX users can get their hands on. Even though Worlds is officially over, they plan to continue maintaining it for the upcoming Season 15. And as a matter of fact, this December they're currently giving away a ton of Masterwork chests, which you can enter to get one of by having one of the official LoL Esports mods installed in your GX corner. You can download them by going to the GX store and checking any of the presets they have that are themed around champions. I know moving over from another browser can be a daunting task in light of all the bookmarks, history, cookies, settings, and whatnot you'll lose, but Opera GX takes care of that with the quick import tool, letting you synchronize everything from other browsers and also being fully compatible with every Google Chrome extension, so it's all positives, no compromise. Check out Opera GX using my link on screen, which is also in the description below. I've been using it for a long time myself, so I can personally vouch for it. Thanks again as always to Opera GX, but for now, back to Wild Rift. First champion's gonna be Karma. Her playstyle is about identical to her League version, but her mantras instead changed to be an empowered ability passive just like Rengar and Pantheon, wherein upon reaching full stacks, her next ability will be automatically empowered. In exchange, her ultimate becomes a standalone ability, instantly activating mantra and then marking an area to explode after 1 second in a sort of mini Orianna ultimate-like fashion. Now, having an additional damaging ability would necessitate a numbers rebalancing, but I think this Karma is a lot more interactive with better playmaking and room for aggression, as opposed to the Karma we have now who mostly plays like a hit-and-run poke mage. Nothing wrong with that, mind you, but as someone who's had to constantly deal with Karma top back in the days of like tank Karma and whatnot, I think this will force Karma to be more interactive. On that note, her mantra W doesn't heal her. Instead, it connects an additional tether to another enemy champion closest to your target for a potential same effect. This obviously has a ton of use cases, being a miniature version of Vars' ultimate where you want to get away from the primary target as quickly as possible, consequently making it so, for example, the enemy support, who normally wants to be nearby their ADC to peel for them, now has to get away from them to not cause a double tether, giving your team the opportunity to attack during that moment. It also makes it less likely for solo Karma to become a thing again, since most of why solo Karma is such an issue is the fact that she can heal for a ton of HP with the mantra W in League. Definitely would prefer this on Karma instead of her current healing one. Overall, Wild Rift Karma's gameplay appears to be much more interactive with more playmaking potential. Next champion is going to be Blitzcrank. It's become a bit of a meme at this point that his W containing the self-debuff is needlessly punishing in this day and age, with every other champion having a billion dashes in the kit and whatnot. While it is still present within his mobile version, Overdrive was given an additional component that caught my attention. It comes with the usual surge of decaying movement speed in the slow after, but you can double cast the ability to overclock Blitzcrank and force out even more speed. We're talking close to triple the amount. However, if you do this, he becomes ultra slowed at the end of it, 99% for 2 seconds in fact. I actually really love this idea, and it wasn't until just now when I noticed, why doesn't this mechanic exist in League? The idea of doubling down on a buff or something to get even more value at a greater cost afterwards. In any case, seeing as Blitzcrank's only job is to grab someone and lock them down, he really doesn't need to move around after the fact. I'm willing to bet many Blitzcrank mains would gladly accept the ultra slow if it meant they could have 1000 movement speed even for a second. I wonder though, who else could benefit from an overclocking mechanic? For now though, let's move on and talk about Vi. Vi's stunting blows and blast shield were switched around, which I think makes perfect sense because Vi practically doesn't have a W. She has a Q and E and essentially 2 passives. Her new blast shield grants her, continue to surprise everyone, a shield. I know, crazy, right? The shield strength depends on the number of stacks you build up beforehand, which can be accumulated through basic attacks and ability hits. Furthermore, when cast in full stacks, Vi gains a burst of speed for the duration as well. I love this. One of the biggest issues I pointed out in my Why No One Plays episode on her back in 2021 I know she's decently popular now, but she wasn't always. I mentioned how after landing Vault Breaker, she really doesn't have any way to keep on top of her opponent, so they dash away or put distance between you and them. If your ultimate's down, you won't be able to press the attack. Something like this would be really handy for chasing down fleeing opponents, and I like how you have the option to decide between the immediate protection or holding off a bit longer to get more value out of it, much like a set W. Switching Vi's W and passive around gives her ever so slightly more skill expression, which is always a plus in my book. Next champion is going to be Annie. Someone actually told me this in a Why No One Plays episode. In my video discussing summoners, I talked about how the main problem with summons is the inherent lack of agency they have beyond being a meat shield. They might gain their personal effects like how Daisy is a 3-hit knockup or Tibbers goes 8 if you kill Annie, but while active, all you can really do is command them to move around. Annie's mobile version has something in mind for that. After summoning Tibbers, you're given the option to recast your ultimate, causing Tibbers to wind up for 2 seconds and then jump on someone to deal damage and knock them up. Definitely makes you worry about Tibbers a lot more, which is a good thing in my opinion. Secondarily, Annie's Disintegrate's a skill shot that explodes upon the first enemy hit or at max distance, so it's a lot like Hui's Devastating Fire. I think it's a worthwhile trade-off as it gives Annie more wave clear and a better neutral game. The changes to her Q and ultimate would be highly welcome in the main game. While it sucks to lose a point and click stun, that is partly responsible for why Annie feels so underwhelming right now. It's too good of an ability to have. Shuttling away some of that power budget and reinvesting that throughout her kit is a good solution, and I wholeheartedly would love to see Annie's mobile version ported over to PC. You knew this was coming, one of the few champions whose Wild Rift version is actually fairly well known among League players, Teemo. Teemo's been changed around fairly significantly on mobile. For one, Toxic Shot became his passive, which, just like Vi, I think makes a lot more sense, and Guerrilla Warfare became his new E, behaving sort of like a mix between Twitch Ambush and King Shadow stuff, wherein so long as he's in a rush, he can hold on to the camo forever, and once he breaks out of it, he gets a boost of speed. This alone is so much better than the lousy excuse of a passive and E in his PC version. Being able to move around and reposition without having to be in a rush gives Teemo many more ways to sneak around and mess you up. It would make him 10 times more annoying to play against, but it's a necessary evil, I'd say. Additionally, Teemo's W comes with a Vayne-style tumble followed by the movement speed. For how fast and nimble Teemo's portrayed to be, ironically, he's one of the easiest champions to lock down in the game. With this in tandem with Guerrilla Warfare, he can outplay and juke his opponents a lot more, making him actually viable for a change. I hope he never does become viable, but casting aside personal bias, Teemo's Wild Rift version has to come to League. Now let's talk about Sona. Depending on how you look at it, Sona's mobile iteration is either a really dumbed down version of her or a more interactive one. The power chord effects on her Q, W, and D have been effectively taken out to make room for her new power chord passive, causing her next basic attack after 3 ability uses to deal bonus damage and stun the target for half a second. They likely did this to make her feel easier to play, so again, depending on who you ask, the power chord effects on a Q, W, and E might be more valuable, or a stun after using 3 abilities is more valuable. We can debate that another time. What I really want to highlight is the new crescendo. Instead of projecting a wave in a straight line, she sends out a circle thingamadoohickey to a target location that pulsates every so often, dealing damage to enemies in the area. The first instance of damage from this ability has a 1-second stun, so the stun component is still there, but it went from an immediate disruption tool to more of an area control tool. I think this adds an element of consistency to Sona. If she misses Crescendo in League, there's not much you can do to remedy the situation, but with her Wild Rift version of Power Chord and Crescendo, she can offer consistent pressure in a team fight, which is kind of the whole shtick with her anyway. While Seraphine's more burst oriented, Sona's more consistent. The difference between her League version and Wild Rift is a trade-off. Do you want to have a lower skill floor in exchange for a lower skill ceiling, or do you want a higher skill floor in exchange for a higher ceiling? I personally think the whole power chord dynamic on her League version is criminally underrated. She's not a face ult champion contrary to what her gameplay might suggest. But at the same time, I do like this version of Crescendo a bit more. Next champion is Shyvana. This is a juicy one. I'm aware she's next in line to get a VGU after Skarner, but assuming that doesn't show up for another 20 years, I wouldn't mind getting the Wild Rift version. Her passive has been completely changed. Now she builds up stacks whenever killing monsters, objectives, or champions, stacking up to 400 times, with every 100 stacks upgrading her abilities in Dragon form in a set order, exactly like Syndra. At 100 stacks, Shyvana's Q applies a slow in addition to the AoE damage it does in Dragon form, giving her more stick potential in a fight. At 200 stacks, her W speeds are up even more in tandem with the larger circle. At 300 stacks, the bonus damage against marked enemies deals true damage. I'm aware this means it converts to percent held true damage, but I think this time it's intentional, seeing as how they're trying to follow a theme here with Shyvana and Smolder both being Dragon champions. I'd also assume 300 stacks takes a while to get. Lastly, at 400 stacks, while in Dragon form, Shyvana gains Omnifam. This adds more nuance to her kit and encourages you to play her as she was originally meant to be played, a juggernaut with good DPS and tempo, as opposed to the League version we've had for a while where she throws out a bunch of torpedoes and calls it a day. This could be a nice mid-scope update to give her while they work on the eventual VGU. Full disclosure, I have no complaints about Fiddle's current PC version, but I did want to cover this because he's noticeably different on mobile. Fiddle's passive no longer lets him spawn breed clones. Instead, they spawn a champion and epic monster takedowns, exploding after 2 seconds to fear nearby enemies. On that note, his Q fear has been shortened a bit and also turned into a skill shot, no longer a point and click. I believe this is a worthwhile trade-off though, as he now has what is basically Lissandra's passive, only instead of dealing damage, every single enemy champion that dies becomes a hard CC bomb that you have to get away from as quickly as possible, augmenting Fiddle's already terrifying teamfight pressure. One more thing to mention is that on Wild Rift, Fiddle can actually move while using Bountiful Harvest, adding a layer of consistency to his DPS. Normally I would have a problem with this, but seeing as our sphere is a lot shorter, having a bit more movement would be kind of nice, and it would also make Fiddle less dependent on exploding you immediately. The reason Fiddle players go full AP and sometimes purposefully don't buy Hourglass is because the entirety of his impact hinges on that initial jump scare. Being able to move while casting W can give him more staying power in a fight. Of course, it would have to lower his burst damage a bit to compensate. Second to last one's Hecarim, more or less the same except I like what they did with his Q. Instead of a spamming ability, you can charge his Q for a small duration to increase the range of it, and if he hits an enemy champion at full charge, he does bonus damage to them, gains a burst of speed, and empowers the next cast of Rampage to deal bonus damage, kind of like how it is on PC. Again, it comes down to preference. Do you prefer mashy spamming Q, or do you prefer the extra boost of speed, which as you know on Hecarim, speed equates to power? I like this one I think, because the increased attack range can be beneficial even at the cost of uptime. My guess is that they took away the mash ability of his Q in favor of this to account for the lower APM you have on mobile. I don't think either is better or worse than the other. In fact, I'm curious, Hecarim means, if you could get a burst of speed by charging your Q, would you rather have this one, or do you still think the Q spam we have on League is better? Let me know in the comments. Last but not least, Janna. Janna might be the most altered champion between Wild Rift and League. Why? No clue, but it might be something to look into. Practically the entirety of her kit got changed in some way, so let's go through one at a time. Tailwind gives her and nearby allied champions bonus move speed, doesn't matter if they're walking towards her or not, but there's no extra DPS component compared to her League version. Howling Gale can store up to 2 charges, giving her the ability to summon 2 tornadoes at once. That being said, she can't control the charge time of it, meaning she loses the instant cast, forcing her to use it more as traditional crowd control than a zoning tool or disruption. Zephyr is changed to target 3 champions at once. Friendlies get a boost of speed while baddies take damage. Eye of the Storm shields herself, the nearest turret, and the nearest allied champion with the lowest current health percentile, giving all of them bonus damage. This is of course compensated by a far lower shield value and no way to refund the cooldown through slows or knockups. Finally, unlike in League where Janna has to actively be channeling to maintain the healing effect, in Wild Rift, the healing storm kinda just stays there, making it so you don't have to choose between exposing yourself to heal or losing the heal to be allowed to move. Okay, all things considered, this version of Janna is straight up broken. While I do think it would be interesting to port this over to League, they would have to really tweak the numbers around to make her fair. Shielding up to 3 targets at once, targeting 3 champions at once with a W, and holding 2 tornadoes even if you can't use one immediately or delay it, definitely feels a bit much, so I think maybe we shouldn't carry over everything. If I could choose one ability though, I think Zephyr would be nice. More impact on a W instead of just being a poke tool, and having usage even outside of combat to help her team get to places faster. That would be a nice quality of life change to have by making the player decide between prioritizing damage or tempo. Alright, so those are the 10 champions who I personally would like to see their Wild Rift versions ported over to League. Not necessarily because they're better, it's just fascinating to see how different the 2 games are just by referencing the same source material. I will say though, it confounds me that Riot doesn't notice how some of the Wild Rift versions are just objectively better than the ones they have on League, and yet they don't feel like importing them. Yes, I'm aware the games were built on different engines, but surely it wouldn't be too much effort to program Vi's passive and W switch or Teemo's passive and E switch. For Teemo, they already have the infrastructure in place with stuff like Twitch Q and King E. For my money, it's probably some kind of bureaucratic red tape or something, it's always that. But anyways, what do you guys think about the differences? Do you agree that they should be migrated, or do you like the versions we have as they are? You're welcome to share in the comments down below. That's all for today though, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.